Driving is one of the most important things in our lives. It's our freedom, our necessity. It's almost an extension of who we are. It allows us to be anywhere, sometimes anyone we need to be. In America, driving is a rite of passage. For many, it represents our first step from adolescence into adulthood. From an early age, we look forward to our first solo drive. In fact, we look beyond our first time at the wheel to what has become the icon of driving in America, to this, the automobile. Our car can become a major part of our persona. We need only look as far as our neighborhood high school parking lot to see the first manifestation of this phenomenon. But later in our lives, our preoccupation with how others see us in our car evolves to a measure of our success: status. We wear our car like a fine suit. Our neighbors, maybe even our own driveway, holds evidence of this. Our attitude toward the automobile can be seen in almost every aspect of our lives. And in every case, we look beyond driving to the car itself. Our cavalier attitude is born out of our experience with the automobile in key phases of our development. As a child, our parents' reference to the car holds connotations of a carnival joyride. Later, in driver education, driving isn't a major emphasis either. We're taught simply the location of the pedals and the rules of the road, and nothing more. Anything done well is an art, and we're going to teach you the art of intelligent driving. Now, we're not teaching anyone to become race drivers. In fact, we advocate obeying all local and national traffic laws. We are going to show you a methodology for positioning yourself to best use your car's controls and thereby take maximum advantage of its features. We'll show you techniques that allow you to maximize your car's potential at all times. For example, negotiating a turn in such a way as to keep a maximum of traction in reserve. And we'll dispel misconceptions, such as the safest way to slow a car at a panic stop is to pump the brakes. That is actually an extremely haphazard and minimally effective technique. Driving intelligently is part skill, part attitude, and part art. We're going to teach you the techniques that become a component of your skill set. Your desire to apply that skill set demonstrates you have the attitude, and the art that is your own driving will become a byproduct of deliberate actions taken by you to precisely move your car from one position on the road to the next. The next question on your mind should be what? What are these techniques? And maybe to a lesser degree, how? How do I affect these techniques? But before we can answer that question, we have to quantify exactly what we intend to accomplish with them. I don't want to drastically alter what we do in the car. Let's take a look as I negotiate a turn without the benefit of any of the techniques. Obviously, I had no problem negotiating that turn. To our credit, we have subconsciously taught ourselves what we need to know to adequately operate a motor vehicle. We know that by doing this with the controls, the car will do that. But to what degree do we really understand what's going on? And if our technique is subconscious, how much can we really rely on it should circumstances breed an unusual sequence of events? The answer is we can't, because too much of what happens is beyond our conscious awareness. And that's where the techniques from this tape really make a difference. We're going to make subtle changes in what you do behind the wheel, not to rob you of your comfort level, but by breaking down each movement into its component parts, we can now associate a conscious, purposeful action at the controls with a quantifiable reaction of the vehicle. Let's look again. Although not outwardly visible, I'm experiencing a precise cause and effect relationship that not only allows me to extend the limits in which I can operate, but enables me to more precisely meter how far from those limits I'm currently working. Ultimately, keeping below the limits of your car while peacefully coexisting with other drivers is key to driving intelligently. Common sense tells us that. But there is a difference between driving safely and selfishly ignoring the fact we are sharing the roadway with hundreds of other drivers. And it's that subtle difference that is driving intelligently. That may seem like common sense too, but common sense also tells us that driving slower is safer. The fact is, a driver going 10 miles per hour slower than everybody else is much more of a hazard been a driver going 10 miles per hour faster. In almost every situation, common sense will carry us 65 to 75% of the way to driving intelligently, but fails us for that last 25 to 35%. This is because we've been led to believe common sense, which really amounts to little more than ill-conceived notions of responsible conduct, are the tools we need to be safe on the nation's roads. These notions constitute little more than rules of thumb that do not adequately address the majority of situations drivers encounter. In any other discipline, these notions would have been rejected as old wives' tales. Yet for some reason, in our culture, the practice of driving has escaped such scrutiny. We are going to rebuild your perception of driving, starting from the way you sit in the seat through situation-specific instructions. In the process, we'll replace common sense with concise objectives for each circumstance. The goal being a repertoire of procedures built from techniques themselves composed of discrete, precise actions at the controls. Driving will become a discipline, one which will bring stress-free satisfaction every time we get behind the wheel. We need to think of driving as though it were an athletic activity. The first thing an athlete needs to perfect is relaxation. If you watch slow motion footage of a sprinter, you'll notice that only the muscles used to propel him are straining. The rest are basically just along for the ride, with the exception of a few that are used lightly just for balance. We need to find a position in the car that allows us to be relaxed while we're operating it. There are some cars that have as many as 10 or 12 separate adjustments for the seats. We're going to concern ourselves with just 3. The first is seat cushion position, front to back. The next is the seat back rate. That's the angle of the back of the seat. And the last is the seat cushion rate, which is basically the angle that the seat cushion is sitting in the car. The way we adjust the seat cushion position is with a lever here on the front of the car. Well, for those of you that have electrically adjustable seats, there'll be some adjustment controls either down here between the seat and the floorboard, or on a console here in the center of the car. When we want to adjust our seat rake position, what we're concerned about is using our legs for measurement, our legs to the pedals. But before we can actually begin to make that measurement, we must make sure that we're firmly in our seat. To do that, we put both hands on the seat cushion like this, push up, and slide ourselves as far back in the seat as we can go. The goal here is to make sure that our buttocks is as far back in the seat as it can possibly be. There's 2 reasons for this. The first is we're going to feel vibrations through the car as it goes over the road surface, and we want to be able to feel those vibrations over the entire length of our lower back. The second reason is we're less likely to be susceptible to fatigue if we're sitting up straight. That makes us more alert, and that makes us a better driver. If we have an automatic transmission, our adjustment in terms of distance is going to be based on the distance between the seat cushion and the accelerator pedal. If we have a manual transmission, then we're going to use our left foot and base it on the clutch pedal. Everything we do with the accelerator pedal, we want to accomplish by pivoting our foot at the heel. Now, if this is a difficult adjustment to make, favor releasing pressure rather than pushing the pedal to the floor. Basically, we spend more time on the highway coasting than we do under full throttle acceleration. For a manual transmission, we're concerned with depressing the clutch pedal. When we press the pedal, it must go all the way to the floor. When the pedal is on the floor, our leg must be comfortably extended, but not completely straight. We want to keep our buttocks against the seat back, but at the same time, we want to be as far from the pedal as comfortably possible. Our motivation is reducing fatigue. If we have to stretch too far to reach the clutch pedal, our leg is going to very quickly grow tired. Conversely, if we're too close, it requires too much movement of the thigh in order for us to affect the actuation of the pedal. The ideal distance is determined when the clutch is depressed completely to the floor, our leg is just slightly bent. Also, we're pressing the clutch pedal with the ball of our foot, not the toes. That keeps the ankle from growing fatigued as well. Now the second adjustment is the seat back rake. The way we determine that proper distance is we put our shoulders firmly against the seat back. Remember now, we're trying to feel vibration the entire length of the back, and we rest our wrists across the top of the steering wheel. What should happen is our wrists should themselves fit over the top of the steering wheel, and our hands should dangle across the other side. Clearly here there's too much distance. So I'm going to adjust the seat. Usually it's done with a lever down here on the side, or some cars have a knob. And this way, I'm going to put my shoulders against the back of the seat, rest my hands over the steering wheel, and this is the proper distance. Now the last adjustment, not all cars share. It's the angle or the rake of the seat cushion. Sometimes when we're adjusting our seat back angle, we may upset the adjustment we've already made with the seat cushion. So what you may have to do is adjust them both a little bit and play with them until you get both of them in exactly the right place. Sometimes the ability to adjust the rake of the seat cushion can help this. I personally like to have the front of the seat cushion as far up as possible because that winds up supporting the thighs and it keeps me more firmly planted in the seat. When manipulating the steering wheel, we're going to use the palms of our hands rather than the insides of our fingers. This is because the palm of our hand is the most sensitive part of our hand. We're going to grasp the steering wheel at positions 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock as though the steering wheel were the face of a clock. When we grasp the steering wheel, we're going to allow our thumbs to come across the inside of the steering wheel, not wrap around from behind like this. We're going to actually make a line from the tip of our thumb across the inside of our palm, which allows our palm to lay flat across the steering wheel. This gives us the best ability to feel the communication the car is giving us by vibrations through the front wheels and the entire steering system. This is how we know exactly what the car is doing as we travel over the ripples in the road. When we're on the highway, our hands never have to leave the 9 o'clock and the 3 o'clock position. If there's a bend to the right, we simply turn the wheel to the right. If there's a bend to the left, we just turn the wheel to the left and then bring the wheel back to the straight ahead position. Off the highway, however, we have to use a slightly different technique. We assume there's a vertical line running the distance of the steering wheel, and we never ever allow our hands to cross that line. If we're going to make a turn to the right, our right hand relaxes its grasp, comes to the 12 o'clock position, and pulls the steering wheel down while our left hand relaxes its grasp and allows the steering wheel to slide through it. As soon as our right hand reaches the 6 o'clock position, our left hand intensifies its grasp and our right hand comes up to the top again, and if we have to turn the wheel anymore, we go through the same process again. Straightening up is the exact opposite. Our left hand releases its grasp, our right hand comes to the 12 o'clock position, our left hand tightens its grasp, right hand comes down to the bottom and slowly brings the wheel back to the straight ahead position where we resume our 9 and 3 hand positions. Going to the left, we simply reverse the roles of the two hands. Left hand comes to 12 o'clock, pulls the steering wheel down, comes back to 12 o'clock if we have to go any farther, and coming back, we simply use our left hand to do all the movement. And then we resume our 9 and 3 positions and continue on from there. This way of manipulating the steering wheel may seem awkward at first, but it'll make you a much smoother driver. And especially in inclement conditions, this will reduce the likelihood that you'll lose traction. Manipulating the accelerator or throttle pedal is pretty straightforward. When we want to go faster, we press the pedal toward the floor. When we want to maintain speed, we relax, and when we want to reduce speed, we relax even farther. Key to throttle pedal manipulation is in the initial movement. In order to allow for the mechanical tolerance of the gears in our drivetrain, we have something called play. We can find this play by lifting up one side of our car and rocking the drive wheel back and forth. In essence, each tooth in the gears have a front face and a back face. When we're on the throttle and we're accelerating, it's the gears' front faces that are in contact with each other. When we're off the throttle and the engine is slowing, trying to slow the car down, it's the back faces of the gears that are in contact with each other. The key to manipulating the throttle is feeling where that play is and crossing over it smoothly. For example, when we're approaching a turn, we are on the brakes. We're off the throttle, the engine is slowing, attempting to slow the car down. It's the back faces of the gears that are in contact with each other. As we move over to the throttle and apply throttle, if we just stab on the throttle like this, the engine speed will increase and we will literally bounce from the back face of the gear teeth to the front face of the gear teeth. The jolts the car experiences can cause instability, especially in the rain or in the snow. The same is true when relaxing pressure on the pedal. If we just snap our foot off the pedal, then the teeth wind up passing across that play and smashing into the other face on the gear teeth. What we want to do is lightly relax pressure on the pedal so that the gear teeth smoothly pass across that play and lightly make contact on the other side of the faces. Now, with an automatic transmission, especially from a domestic manufacturer, this gentle manipulation of the throttle pedal is less crucial in terms of safety, but it will make the ride a lot more pleasant for our passengers. It's been said that the brakes are the most important safety feature of the modern car. But unlike airbags or safety belts, brakes don't work for us on their own. We have to make them work. That makes you and me the most important safety feature in the modern car. Proper manipulation of the brakes again forces us to break some old habits. Many people, when they operate the brake, depress the pedal lightly at first and then increase pressure gradually over the entire distance that they stop. Other people stab at the brake pedal really hard, forcing the car to lunge forward initially. Neither of those two methods are proper. What we want to do is gradually increase pressure on the pedal over about the first third of the distance we're going to be braking. At that point, we reach an amount of pedal pressure and we maintain that pressure for about the next third of our braking distance, maybe the next third, maybe a little bit more than that. Then as we come to the end, we gradually back pressure off. What this does is it allows the car and the suspension to set up so that it can maximize its ability to give us traction. Also, by forcing ourselves to brake this way all the time, we're better disciplined should we have to make an emergency stop, because this technique of applying pressure lightly initially but then reaching a point and holding is the only way that we're able to reach maximum braking potential of the car. Locking the wheels occurs when we depress the brake pedal to slow the car, and the wheels, usually the front wheels, stop turning. This causes excess friction between the tire and the road, which causes the tires to heat up and melt. It will reduce our potential braking capability by at least 30%. Also, when we slow the car, momentum wants to keep pushing it. This push from behind is what forces the car to pitch forward, which also causes weight to shift from the rear of the car to the front. The car is literally rocked forward, putting more pressure on the front wheels and removing pressure from the rear wheels. The braking system in a car is actually designed for this transfer of weight back to front by something called a brake bias. Brake bias is the mechanical characteristic of the braking system to actually favor the front brakes. The front brakes literally clamp down harder than do the rears. The odd thing is, the transfer of weight takes a little bit more time. There's actually a delay. In fact, the heavier the car, the more time it takes for the car to transfer weight from the rear wheels to the front wheels. If we stab on the brake pedal very hard, we immediately apply more pressure to the front wheels than we do the rear, and therefore, because the weight hasn't transferred forward, the front brakes literally overpower the tires, and the front wheels stop turning or they lock up, which means that they're not going to have as much ability to slow us down. What we want to do is apply pressure gradually to the brakes at first by pressing on them gently. This gives the car time to transfer weight forward, or as we say, set up, so that by the time that we reach that maximum pressure that we're going to use, the brake bias, expecting more weight on the front wheels, will already have the weight there and actually be able to brake us down evenly. Now every car is different, so we have to learn exactly how to press the brake pedal by feel. Now that we know how the pedal itself needs to be pressed, we have several options on how to use our foot. If we have an automatic transmission, we can either use our right or our left foot. In either case, we'll use the ball of our foot and press. It isn't necessary to cover the pedal square. If you're comfortable by covering the pedal from the side, that's fine. If we use our right foot, we lift from the accelerator, move to cover the brake, and press. If we use our left foot, we lift with our right foot off the accelerator, cover the brake with our left foot, and press. With a manual transmission, we'll be manipulating all three, clutch, brake, and throttle at the same time. Since we only have 2 feet, we're going to be doing double duty. We must use our right foot to brake, but we'll be manipulating the throttle at the same time, so we can only use half of our foot. There are 3 choices depending on the configuration of the pedals and your anatomy. The first 2 choices include using the left side of the right foot to cover the brake from the side using the ball of the foot. From this position, we can pivot the foot from the ball and manipulate the throttle with our heel, or we can simply allow the right side of the foot to fold over on the throttle pedal if the pedal is close enough. The other option is to use the heel of our right foot on the brake pedal, and if our anatomy allows, pivot our foot so our toes manipulate the throttle. My buddy Joe here has no problem with that, but my ankles won't allow me to use this method. This method of combining both the brake and the throttle pedal will make more sense later on when we begin combining some of these methods into actual techniques. One such technique is called heel and toe downshifting. And we've actually learned the first part of heel and toe downshifting by learning the proper method of manipulating the brake. Now, heel and toe downshifting is only used for manual transmission cars, while left foot braking, on the other hand, is only used for automatic transmission cars. The clutch is the simplest of all of our pedals to operate. The main thing to remember is the clutch is just a switch, nothing more. It's only used from selecting one gear from another. We never use the clutch to slow ourselves down or to hold our position on the hill. When the clutch is depressed, it's depressed all the way to the floor. When we're not using the clutch is all the way up and our foot is off the surface of the clutch. We never rest our foot on the clutch when we're driving down the road. If your car has a dead pedal to the right of the clutch like my Acura here, then that's the place where we rest our foot. Without a dead pedal, our foot rests right on the floor. If you're handy with tools, you can build yourself a dead pedal. When using the clutch pedal, we depress it to the floor. We select our gear, then we release the clutch pedal to the point where it begins to catch. We stop there for an instant, apply throttle, then we release pressure on the pedal as we apply more throttle. And then our foot goes back to the dead pedal. In the lower gears, the time spent at the catch point is going to be a little longer, especially when starting from a dead stop. But no matter what gear we select, the principles of the method are basically the same. Now, every car is a little different and every driver is a little different too, so operating the clutch is as much an art as anything. So basically, we're going to leave the specifics of the technique up to each individual driver with the following 2 rules. Only use the clutch for changing gears and minimize the amount of time you spend at the catch point as much as possible. When manipulating the gear shift lever, we need only grasp it gently. We don't have to strangle the gear shift lever to get the car in gear. Also, never rest your hand on the gear shift lever while you're driving. This can cause extra friction within the internals of the transmission and cause it to wear out much sooner than it would otherwise. When we shift a gear, we're going to use basically the backs of our fingers and the very, very top of our palm. If we're going to select a gear that's away from us, like first or third, we'll rest our hand on the shift lever like this, pull it beside the appropriate gear, and simply slide the gear shift lever into the appropriate gear. If we're going to select a gear which is closer to us, like second or fourth, we'll simply pull the gear shift lever back with our fingers and gently slide it into that gear. The important thing to remember is to always hesitate right before we select a gear. This gives the internals of the transmission an opportunity to synchronize before we actually select the gear that we're looking for. Sometimes we may miss a shift. This is either selecting the wrong gear or not completely engaging the gear we intended to select. If we select the wrong gear, we'll know as soon as we let up pressure on the clutch pedal. If the gear is too low, the car will lunge forward and the engine RPMs will race very high. If the gear is too high, on the other hand, the engine RPMs will drop very low and the car will be very sluggish if we attempt to press on the accelerator pedal. To correct this, we simply press the clutch in again and select the appropriate gear, bring up the clutch to the catch point, and go on. If, on the other hand, we don't fully engage the gear that we selected, don't just pull the shift lever back into the gear. You've already connected the synchronizer ring inside the transmission against the selected gear, and it's useless to us now. If we pull the gear shift lever into the appropriate gear, we're certain to grind the gears. What we have to do is press the clutch pedal, move the shift lever back against the opposite gear. We don't have to completely engage that gear, simply touch its synchronizer ring to free up the synchronizer ring on the gear that we want. From that point on, we can slide our gear shift back into the selected gear, bring out the clutch to the catch point, and go on. The mirrors are the most misused feature on the car. The rearview mirror was actually invented in the early 1900s at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. At that time, a driver's mechanic rode with him in the car so the mechanic could look behind and warn the driver if another car was about to pass. This enabled the driver to keep his focus straight ahead on what was happening in front of him on the racetrack. One clever driver replaced his 180-pound passenger with a little vanity mirror taped to the very top of his windshield. This enabled him to look straight ahead, at the same time see what was going on behind him. Today, many people misuse the mirrors that we have at our disposal. They still turn their head away from what's going on in front of them and look behind them before they change lanes. If you adjust your mirrors properly, there are no blind spots, and you never ever have to turn your head beyond the small angle required to check one of these three mirrors. Here's how it works. Most people believe there are blind spots where a car can hide. If the mirrors are properly adjusted, their respective fields of view overlap. This means there is no place where a car can hide. As soon as a car leaves one mirror, it has already appeared in another. The colored triangles in this picture represent the fields of view of each of the three mirrors in your car. Notice the side mirrors. When the mirrors are set this way, the driver cannot see either side of his own car. He can't even look down the lanes on either side. The driver doesn't need to see these lanes with the side view mirrors because the rear view mirror in the center has that portion covered. In fact, were the driver on a road alone, guardrail would be the main thing in the side mirrors. And that's okay. The only thing the side mirrors are used for is changing lanes, and they have to show you if there's a car where you want to be or if there's a car moving to the spot where you want to be. The blinking portions of the road represent where you intend to be after a lane-changing maneuver. So only this space is of concern to us in our side view mirrors. We need to know two things from those mirrors. One, if there is another car already in that space, or two, if another car is trying to move to the same place at the same time we are. We can see cars alongside of us without using the mirrors. In fact, as long as they are at least halfway alongside, we can see them with our peripheral vision, and we can see their doors in our mirrors at the same time. If the cars occupy a position where they are not visible in the driver's peripheral vision, they are still clearly within the side view mirrors. Also notice as cars alongside move farther back, their inside corners enter the field of vision of the rear view mirror, while their front end is still in the field of view of the side mirrors. Hence, no blind spot. This takes care of the case where a car is in the spot where you want to be.
These are all the positions of cars that could be in competition with you for the same piece of road during a lane-changing maneuver. So you must see each of these positions to safely execute a lane change. The two side cars can be seen with your peripheral vision. Notice that each trailing car is in the field of view of the side mirrors.
If you adjust your mirrors as demonstrated by the previous graphic, you will never have to turn your head other than looking at these two mirrors to make a safe lane change maneuver. In essence, if I want to change lanes right, and there's a car in that mirror, I can't change lanes. If I want to change lanes right, and that mirror is clear, I can change lanes without any worry. The only problem we may encounter is if a car is approaching us from behind very quickly. In that case, the car may approach us and be in that lane at the same time we move over, and we won't see it in that mirror. The way to combat this is to use this mirror in addition to one of the side view mirrors. Always check this mirror first to make sure that nobody is approaching us. This mirror allows us to see all the lanes on the highway behind us across the entire breadth as far as we can see. So we check here to see if nobody's approaching, then we check there, and if both mirrors are clear, we can change lanes with confidence. If we're going to set the mirrors, the first thing we want to do is go to a parking lot. We position our cars next to other cars in the parking lot and pretend as though they are in the adjacent lanes next to us, and we experiment to see where those cars appear and how they appear in our mirrors. A good starting point to adjust the left side mirror is to place your head up against the glass of the window. While you're placing your head against the glass, if you can just barely see the edge of your car in that mirror, that's exactly the place it should be. When you move your head back to the position behind the wheel, what you should in essence see is nothing but what's over there to the left. For positioning the right mirror, you put your head right here behind the mirror in the center, and the same thing should be true. You should just barely see the edge of your car on the inside of that mirror. Position your head back, and what you should in essence see what's off there to the right and behind you. Check this out in the parking lot to make sure that cars that will be in your way are in fact in your mirror at the appropriate time. Then, still, I wouldn't have the confidence to go out on the highway and just change lanes without looking behind me. Adjust your mirrors, go on the highway, make a decision to see if you think you can change lanes. If the mirror says it's clear, take a glance over your shoulder just to be sure that in fact it is. If the mirror was wrong, you'll at least know that before you make a tragic mistake. But if the mirror says everything is clear and you look over your shoulder and in fact it is, you will gain confidence that you have in fact set those mirrors in the proper place. We've taken a great deal of effort to find the exact seating position, the exact place for our hands on the steering wheel, and even the exact positioning of our mirrors to minimize the amount of effort that's taken from piloting the car down the road. The reason steering column stalks were invented was to allow the driver to manipulate secondary controls without removing his hands from the steering wheel. Steering column stalks today are much more complicated than they used to be, but for the most part, we can still use them the way in which they were intended. On some cars, there are rotary switches on the end of the stalk. On my Integra, the headlights are activated this way. For these controls only will I have to take my hand from the steering wheel. For any of the other uses of the stalks, I will not need to remove my hands from the wheel. When I use the turn signals, for example, I loosen my grip on the wheel, slide my entire hand down to comfortably reach the stalk with my fingertip. Then I either lift up or I push down. There are different functions handled by the stalk depending on the manufacturer of your car. For example, some Ford products have the horn button here on the tip of the left stalk. We relax our grip, bring our hand down against the stalk, and press to operate the horn. Notice that I don't change the position of my hand as I take it away from the wheel. If I need to bring my hand back to the wheel for any reason, I want there to be a minimum of movement to accomplish this. If I want to signal another driver with my high beams, I similarly relax my hold on the wheel, drop my hand, and pull the lever back to me. I I know if I ask you to leave the radio off until you become familiar with all these techniques, it'll never happen, so I won't ask. I will, however, ask that you refrain from being a switcher. Switchers always have to press buttons. Every time there's a commercial or every time there's a song they don't like, a switcher presses buttons until they find a song they do like. Switchers not only have accidents, they cause them. Suffer through a song that's not your favorite. Wait out a couple of commercials. Pick a radio station that plays a majority of songs that you like, or bring tapes of pre-recorded material along with you. If you can't live without the radio, learn to live with it. We've been discussing methods at manipulating the controls. But these methods are a means to an end, and that end is making the car move. Now we can get very, very precise in our definition of moving, either piloting the car down a twisty switchback or maneuvering the car down the highway in the rain, but it's really making the car accelerate, stop, and turn that is the essence of what we're talking about. We're going to combine our methods into techniques that allow us to make the car turn and brake at the best of its and our own capabilities. But before we can begin discussing braking and turning, we have to make the car start moving. At first glance, acceleration seems pretty simple. Press on the pedal and the car moves away. Actually, acceleration can be broken down into 3 distinct steps.
The arrow here represents the time our car spends during acceleration. The first portion is called engagement. This occurs when we first press the accelerator pedal. The second portion is called increase. This is the time we spend with the pedal pressed. And the last phase is called lift. This occurs when we back off or lift from the pedal.
The goal is to make the transition into acceleration and then out from acceleration as imperceptible as possible. This has the effect of minimizing the possibility we'll lose traction should the conditions get slippery. It also will make the ride a lot more pleasant for our passengers.
The likelihood of losing control is greatest during engagement, and to a lesser degree, especially in the snow, lift. These 2 areas are where the car is least stable during acceleration.
Still, the importance of the 3 phases becomes clear when we consider the possible combinations of circumstances under which we accelerate.
The first 2 divisions are accelerating from a dead stop and while already moving. The difference here is primarily during engagement. Then, within each of those, we can be accelerating hard or lightly. We experience the difference between hard and light during increase. Now, within each of these 4 conditions, we can be turning or going straight. If we are turning, our path throughout the turn is in part determined by how hard we press the accelerator pedal, and is affected for the duration of acceleration.
To complete our set of circumstances, consider whether we have a front-wheel drive car or a rear-wheel drive car, because while turning, or if we lose traction, a front-wheel drive car reacts oppositely from a rear-wheel drive car. For each different automatic transmission, engagement is going to be slightly different. Every automatic transmission has a slight delay between pushing on the pedal and when the car actually begins to move. Different manufacturers' transmissions will have different amounts of delay. To engage, press the pedal until the engine's speed begins to increase. And that's all there is to it. To make the transition from being stopped to moving as unabrupt as the mechanics of the car will allow. In a manual transmission car, engagement is a little bit more involved. First, the driver depresses the pedal to raise the engine speed. If you have a tachometer, you should raise the engine speed to between 1500 and 2000 RPM. Contrary to popular belief, we're not going to raise the clutch pedal slowly. We're going to quickly raise the pedal to the catch point. Catch point is the position of the clutch pedal where the car begins to move forward. Now, operating a clutch is a very personal thing. Every car is a little different and every person will use it a little bit differently. In fact, using the clutch is more art than any other aspect of operating a motor vehicle. When using the clutch, we'll give the throttle just a little bit of gas so that the engine speeds increase just slightly, and we'll let the clutch out to the catch point. Where the catch point is something you'll have to learn by feel, and something experience is the only teacher we can use to learn how to do this. Without altering our position at the pedals, however, the car will begin to move forward. It'll literally be synchronizing itself. Also by feel, you'll learn when we've done this just long enough, and at that point, you'll roll off the clutch pedal and roll on to the throttle. This is the transition from engagement to increase. By the time we're completely off the clutch pedal, we have made that transition and we are in increase. Increase is the same for both an automatic and a manual. We push our foot farther on the throttle pedal to a predetermined point. With either a manual or an automatic transmission, as we transition from engagement to increase, we want to press the throttle down to one place and hold it there. If it's an automatic transmission, we hold it there long enough until we just about reach our desired speed and we enter the lift phase. If it's a manual transmission, we hold it down long enough so our engine speed increases until the point at which we shift to the next highest gear. We want to create a constant, even pressure from behind as we begin to move forward. The easiest time to create a jolt is during engagement. So that's the time when it requires the most concentration at trying to be smooth, right at the very beginning. The quickest way to identify incorrect engagement is if the front end lifts real high. By contrast, with correct engagement, the front end doesn't come up nearly as high.
As we engage under acceleration, we cause the tire to rotate. Because of friction between the tire and the roadway, a rotating tire exerts a force upon the road surface. And this causes our car to move. The tire maintains its best traction with the road as long as it's in firm contact. Any slippage disturbs that traction. If we engage too abruptly, we risk the chance of making the tire spin. The tire spins because we've applied too much force and it's lost traction with the roadway. If we have a front-wheel drive, losing control isn't too catastrophic. The front wheels spin and the car simply doesn't move off the line too smoothly. Sometimes a front-wheel drive car has a tendency to slip to one side when the front wheels spin.
The way to correct this is relax pressure on the pedal, but not release totally.
Losing traction with a rear-wheel drive car, however, is much more dangerous. Since the rear wheels are pushing the car, losing traction under engagement will cause the rear end to fishtail and try to catch up and pass the front. The danger here is the car begins to face in a direction away from where we really want to go.
The correction procedure for this is much the same as that for a front-wheel drive car. We're still going to lift off the throttle to allow the rear wheels, in this case, to slow down and regain their contact, their traction with the road. Once this happens, though, we're now going to need to dial in correction one way or the other with the steering wheel to get the car moving back in the direction we originally intended. Once we've completed either of these corrections, we're back into the increase phase. We're going to press on the throttle to allow the car to begin increasing speed again like we wanted. Now, just before we reach the desired speed, we are in the lift phase. This is where we roll off the throttle so that by the time we reach the speed we wanted all along, we will have the throttle at the position required to keep the car coasting down the road at a constant speed. I like to think of this as one fluid movement, from increase to lift to coasting down the road. Once we've reached the desired speed, we've completed the process of acceleration. Accelerating while moving involves basically the same components. The only difference is in engagement. Since our throttle pedal is already depressed to maintain speed, we're effectively in engagement now. When we want to increase speed, we simply press a little farther on the accelerator, making our movements very slow and gradual until the car begins increasing speed. Then as we reach our desired speed, we roll off the throttle so that by the time we are at the speed we want, our foot has moved back off the throttle enough to maintain speed. Accelerating while moving and turning requires a little more concentration. Engagement is the same, but as we press on the throttle pedal farther to increase our speed, we'll find that the pressure on the tires from the increased throttle actually alters our arc through the turn. So we have to make some corrections with the steering wheel to follow the same path we originally intended. If we're in a front-wheel drive car, we have to tighten up on the steering wheel. If we're in a rear-wheel drive car, we may have to loosen up on the steering wheel. The amount of correction that we have to make depends on how much throttle pressure we give, the type of car, the size and weight of the car, and the thickness of the tires. So every car reacts a little differently, and you really have to feel how much correction you have to make rather than having it be a conscious effort. Some additional points. When accelerating while moving, things are slightly different between an automatic and a manual transmission. In a manual transmission, our goal is to engage to allow the faces of the teeth of the gears of the transmission to come in good solid contact. That way we can increase to a higher speed. With an automatic transmission, the goal is a little different. We don't have direct contact with the gears because the transmission works on a slightly different principle. Engagement is to allow the internal mechanism of the transmission to make a decision about how to set itself. Then we can press on the throttle pedal to increase to a higher speed. If we depress the throttle pedal very hard, you may feel a surge as the internal mechanism of the transmission adjusts to the abrupt change. The transmission is what we call kicking down, the automatic transmission equivalent of downshifting to a lower gear. In an automatic transmission, the principle is still the same. Depress the throttle pedal slightly to engage. Allow the internal mechanism of the transmission to set up, then gradually increase, and the transmission's downshift or kickdown will be as smooth as mechanically possible. Some additional considerations. This is not a license to go race driving through country switchbacks. Watching this tape is not a license to go racing anywhere. Always work within the limits of yourself and your car. Driving should be exhilarating. If you feel anxious, that says you're uncomfortable. And that's an indication that maybe you should back off just a little bit. The technique of braking may seem pretty simple. Step on the pedal and the car comes to a stop. The driver of this car doesn't adhere to such a theory, and I wouldn't be standing here if he did.
Like accelerating, braking can be broken down into two main categories. We can then subdivide braking into intent to stop or intent to turn. Then we can further subdivide the intent to turn into transmission type.
The situation in which we find ourselves determines what kind of braking we'll have to do. Are we slowing for a stop sign? Or are we slowing for a turn? And do we have to downshift because of how slow the turn is? These are questions we have to ask ourselves to determine the type of braking we need. But in each case, remember our methods. Apply pedal pressure gently by pressing on the pedal, and then hold it steady. We'll examine braking with intent to stop first because it's the same for both types of transmissions. The only difference being with a manual transmission, at some point we'll have to press the clutch to keep from stalling the engine. And we'll use a manual transmission car to demonstrate the technique. Just keep in mind that it's the same no matter what type of car that you have. Most of the time when we have to come to a complete stop, we have ample warning. The minute we see a traffic light change color or we see a stop sign, we begin slowing. We do this by lifting out of the throttle, like we did at the end of acceleration, or lifting out of the throttle completely so that we can cover the brake with our right foot. The difference being how much distance we have before we have to be completely stopped, and of course the characteristics of your car. A key aspect of the technique in almost every case, with the exception of the most emergency situations, is we want to imagine as though our feet were in a vat of molasses. Lifting off the throttle is a very slow, gradual process that allows the car to keep stable, and then we cover the brake and we press into the brake with that same kind of slow movement until we reach the point at which we're going to maintain pressure. Since I can see the light up ahead is red, I have ample time to brake, so I'll employ light braking. I lift off the throttle gently and smoothly so the car starts to slow on its own. I cover the brake, and I apply gentle pressure to the brake pedal until it's even. And then as I approach where I want to stop, I gradually roll my foot off the brake until I come to a smooth, even stop. This process of maintaining an even pressure on the brakes is not a natural tendency, and it will require some retraining of yourself before you can do it without having to think about it. The natural tendency is to gradually keep increasing pressure until we eventually come to a stop. While maintaining even pressure on the brake pedal doesn't really make a difference under light braking, the ability to instinctively maintain even pressure has enormous paybacks under hard braking and emergency braking situations.
All cars have a static weight distribution, usually about 55% on the front tires and 45% on the rears. When we apply the brakes, the car pitches forward. This causes weight transfer, changing the static weight distribution by subtracting weight from the rear wheels and adding it to the front wheels.
What this means in terms of braking is if the front wheels are carrying 75% of the weight, the front brakes are responsible for 75% of the car's braking. Now the braking system is biased to favor the front wheels, meaning the front brakes actually brake harder than the rears. Here's why.
Part of what determines how much braking or longitudinal grip a tire can generate is the amount of weight or load on that tire. Increase the load, as in the case of the front tires in this diagram, and the front tires are capable of generating more braking grip than the rear tires. If both front and rear brakes received even pressure from the pedal, the rear tires would reach their adhesion limit before the front tires were working very hard. This would severely limit the total amount of braking force a car could have. The goal of a braking system is to have both front and rear brakes reach maximum at the same time. In the case of our diagram, hard braking causes a 75%-25% split in the weight transfer. So for this car, the front brakes would receive the precise amount of relative pressure to accommodate this difference.
Not every car has a 75-25 weight split under braking. Every car is different. You and I don't care about what the exact number is. The manufacturer has taken that into account when the braking system was designed. What you and I need to know, however, is that maximum braking cannot occur until maximum weight transfer has already occurred. This means that if somebody runs a stop sign and cuts in front of me, I have to effect weight transfer before I can accomplish maximum braking. Stabbing on the brake pedal is just going to extend my braking distance and I may run right into it.
One of the worst things that can happen in an emergency stopping situation is for the wheels to stop turning. This is also known as locking up your wheels. If you should lock up your wheels in a panic stop, never pump your brakes, as is prescribed in common folklore. This will actually keep the car in a very unstable situation. If your wheels should lock, gently relax pressure on your brake pedal to allow the wheels to begin turning again. Once they begin turning, they've established more firm contact with the road. Then you can slowly reapply pressure, effect weight transfer, and finally effect maximum braking. Let's re-examine our emergency braking episode, being aware of the mechanics involved. Emergency happens. I apply the brake pedal gently but firmly until I come to a controlled and safe stop.
Sometimes our intent in using the brakes is just to slow the car down a little. Maybe there's a bend in the road or someone in front of us is turning. We have to use the brakes simply to slow down to keep from running over the back of them. Sometimes we don't even need the brakes to slow down. We simply lift out of the throttle and allow the car to slow down on its own. I recommend this practice whenever possible. For example, on the highway, don't keep your foot mashed into the throttle until you're right up on the back of somebody. As you approach somebody in your lane, lift out of the throttle, allow the car to slow down to match their speed at a safe following distance, rather than waiting to the last second and having to mash on the brakes. However, if you do need the brakes in this situation to slow the car down a bit, use light brake pedal pressure. Sometimes our intent is to slow more than ordinary light braking will do. A turn on a rural switchback requires an intermediate level of braking in order for us to negotiate the turn safely. This situation in an automatic transmission car is little different from what we've already seen. I'm driving an automatic transmission BMW. Notice if your car has a steering wheel where the spokes make convenient thumb rests, it's okay to rotate your thumbs from the sides of the steering wheel to the spokes themselves. As I approach the turn, I'm going to cover the brake and brake a little harder than I would for highway braking. As I turn the wheel, I'll rotate off the brake, apply throttle, and accelerate out of the turn. In the preceding case, the transmission will automatically downshift to select the appropriate gear for us, and we can comfortably motor right out of the turn. But in a manual transmission car, it's the driver's responsibility to select the appropriate gear. This may seem a needless bother at first, but it's actually one of the most rewarding experiences from driving an automobile. Manipulating the pedals and the shift lever can be a very poetic motion, and it's the reason I choose to drive a manual transmission car over an automatic. Let's look at the same turn again with a manual transmission car. I will actually shift while I'm braking so that I can accelerate right out of the turn as soon as I'm ready. I downshifted from 5th to 3rd, and then from 3rd to 2nd. Then I accelerated smoothly out of the turn. In both of those shifts, there were a lot of things going on, but they melt together into one fluid movement, which is truly the art of intelligent driving.
The challenge of heel and toe is the fact that we have to manipulate all three pedals in the footwell at the same time. And we have only 2 feet.
Here's why. We have a mechanical problem to overcome. As we slow and require a lower gear, the engine slows down with us because the engine speed is determined by the gear to which it's connected in the transmission. Now, inside the transmission, a lower number gear is always spinning faster than a higher number gear. So we have to kick the engine speed up to match the speed of that lower gear that we're shifting into. Sound confusing? It's not once the concept becomes clear. Watch the turn again, but this time pay particular attention to the engine sound as we go through the turn. This process of kicking the engine speed higher is called blipping the throttle, and it's a necessary part of the technique because we're not only going to use the blip of the throttle to synchronize the engine with the new gear, but also to synchronize the internal workings of the transmission. As I shift down to my lower gear, I'm going to stall my shifting movement in the neutral position just long enough to let the clutch out and blip the throttle, all at the same instant. Then I'll press my clutch pedal back in again and shift to my gear. Now, I skipped 4th gear in the example because there wasn't enough room to downshift through 3 gears in the distance I had to stop. In fact, sometimes we have to downshift directly to 2nd gear and use one massive blip of the engine to send it up high enough to meet 2nd gear. Some drivers, as a matter of course, will always blip the throttle only once for the gear they feel they'll need at that corner. And that's okay too. Whichever you're more comfortable with is what I advocate. But before we get into the theory of heel and toe downshifting, let's go over the mechanics. Now remember our methods. We have to find some comfortable way to cover both the brake and the throttle pedal with our right foot. Remember, there were 3 ways in which we could operate the brake pedal with a manual transmission car. We could brake with the heel and pivot our toes on the top of the throttle pedal. Or we could brake with the ball of our foot and pivot the heel over the throttle. Or if the pedals are positioned correctly, as they are in this RX-7, you can cover the brake with the left side of your right foot and then fold the right side of your foot over the throttle as such. I prefer the last of the 3 methods, but the throttle pedal and the brake pedal in my Acura were spaced too far apart. I took a piece of cardboard and cut it with a carpet knife until it fit snugly behind the existing throttle pedal, and then I used that cardboard as a template to cut out a piece of scrap plastic. Then I used screws and nuts to fasten it to the existing pedal. If you're adequate with tools, you could do something like this with your own car, if it makes heeling and towing more comfortable. Let's examine each piece of heel and toe separately. As I approach the turn, I place the left side of my right foot on the brake and apply light braking. I then press the clutch when the engine speed drops between 1500 and 2500 RPM. Notice the clutch is all the way to the floor. I move the shift lever to the neutral position and let the clutch pedal out at the same time. The goal here is for the lever to be in neutral at the same instant the pedal is out. Now let me back that up a little. This time, watch my right foot. At the same time the clutch pedal reaches the top of its travel, I fold my right foot and kick up the engine speed. When I press the throttle, I press it and get off. I actually press the clutch and move the shift lever into gear all at the same time. The goal is to blip the engine up too high and release the clutch pedal as the engine falls back down to the appropriate speed. I lift the side of my right foot and at the same time I push the clutch pedal back in and slide the shift lever into gear. Then I raise the clutch pedal and catch the engine as it falls back down to the correct speed. Now remember, I actually downshifted through 2 gears in that turn. First from 5th to 3rd, and then from 3rd to 2nd. Let's watch again. Even though my foot is resting on the clutch pedal, I've completely released the clutch pedal. As the engine speed drops, I press the pedal for the shift to 2nd. I shift from 3rd to neutral, blip the throttle, take 2nd, and put the clutch to the floor at the same time and release the clutch to engage the engine. Now that we understand the mechanics, let's watch it again at actual speed. Now, one more time from the driver's point of view. Heel and toe downshifting is the single most rewarding aspect of driving for me. It exemplifies the elegance of driving intelligently, and further, it's the safest way to slow a car down for a bend in the road or a turn at an intersection. I recommend that you rewind the tape and watch again the demonstration on heel and toe downshifting. Then go out to your car in the driveway with the engine off and practice the mechanics. Then go back in, rewind the VCR, and watch the demonstration one more time. Then take your car out to a stretch of road that isn't traveled very heavily, maybe early in the morning, and make sure no one's behind you, and actually practice heel and toe downshifting on the road. I recommend you start with the shift from 4th to 3rd because that's the easiest that you'll do. Then do the shift from 5th to 3rd. Remember, you're going to have to kick the engine up a little higher in that case. Then slow the car down a bit, do the shift from 3rd to 2nd, and then get the car going a little faster, slow down a little more, and make the shift from 5th to 2nd. Practice all those several times until you become comfortable with them. Then you can take them to other roads that you travel more frequently and use them in turns that you're familiar with. Remember these 4 steps. First step, brake and press the clutch pedal to the floor. Second step, shift to neutral, release the clutch, and blip the throttle.
Third step. Clutch all the way to the floor and select the lower gear. And the last step, release the clutch to engage the engine.
Some final thoughts as you practice. The first obstacle you'll encounter will be the coordination of your hand and feet. So practice this a lot before you even start the engine. The next obstacle you'll encounter will be an intuitive understanding for just how much to blip the throttle. How high do I raise the engine as I downshift to a lower gear? When you start out, never pop the clutch. Always raise the clutch pedal to the slip point like you do when you're starting out. If you don't raise the engine speed high enough and you pop the clutch, the car will lunge forward. This is not a very comfortable feeling, nor a very stable attitude for the car. Once we get the car moving, we soon encounter the next problem. The fact that the road rarely goes off in the same direction that it started. This is a very esoteric description of something more commonly called a turn. As a driver, we have to make the car change direction just to follow the road. A turn can range from a bend on the highway where we keep a constant speed to a sharp 90-degree turn on a country switchback where we have to slow, maybe even downshift if we're driving a manual transmission car. The thing all turning situations have in common is we'll use the steering wheel as the primary source of input for control. However, depending on the type of car, we may use other controls in concert with the steering to precisely guide the car through the turn.
All turns have 4 distinct phases: approach, entry, arc, and exit.
To understand the importance of each phase, it's helpful to discuss some of the difficulties a car experiences in negotiating a turn.
The first problem a car encounters is physically changing the direction it faces. If we could suspend a car in the air, then try to make it rotate in the air, it would be very difficult, even for a strong person.
This is because of the difficulty involved in making an object rotate about a vertical axis. In order to make a car rotate about a vertical axis, we have to transfer energy into the mass of that car. Since a car weighs between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds, it takes a considerable amount of energy to make that car rotate.
The next problem the car encounters is centrifugal force. This is a force acting on any object traveling in an arc. The direction of the force is represented by the red arrow in this diagram. Notice that the force pushes against the car from within the turn, trying to make it go straight.
Centrifugal force's lateral push on a car is what makes a car lean over or heel in a turn. The faster we take a given turn, the greater centrifugal force's push on the side of that car. The point at which the tire's ability to grip the roadway is overcome by centrifugal force is the point at which we skid, which indicates the tire's traction with the roadway plays a role in our ability to make the car turn.
A tire is capable of generating a certain amount of traction under braking, or acceleration. Traction in either of these applications is called longitudinal grip. A tire is also capable of generating a certain amount of lateral grip. Lateral grip is what resists centrifugal force and keeps a car in the arc of a turn. 100% in this diagram represents the maximum cornering or braking force a tire is capable of generating. Interestingly, for example, a tire can only generate 100% braking while generating 0% cornering. Similarly, a tire can only generate maximum cornering or lateral grip when it's not being asked to accelerate or brake.
This fundamental characteristic of how tires react to input from the controls is the most significant absence from popular dogma concerning driving. Applying brakes too hard in the middle of a turn is one of the biggest reasons for losing control. Many people will enter a turn at what appears to be a reasonable speed, realize they're going a little bit too fast for them to feel comfortable, and press the brakes too hard. Now, while the tires were probably able to resist centrifugal force prior to the application of brakes, this misapplication of the brakes sends the tires over the edge. This isn't to say that we can't brake in the middle of turns. We can, and we have to. There are many traffic lights and stop signs at the end of bends in the road, albeit poor urban planning, but hazards we have to contend with nonetheless. In fact, recent advances in tire design and auto suspension design increase our ability to apply the brakes in the middle of a turn, but the basic principle from the previous diagram is still the limiting factor.
The theoretical limit of a tire's ability to maintain traction at any time is one where both lateral and longitudinal grip add up to 100%.
The conclusion we can draw from all this theory is that if we are in a turn using 75% of the tire's ability to turn, we have about 25% of the tire's braking ability left over. This is a delicate balance to be sure, but not impossible in the dry. In the wet or snow, it's terribly difficult. Two things we can put into practice. First of all, always work well below the limits of your automobile. Second, we'll use the phases of turning to isolate the safest place to transition from braking to turning.
We'll use approach for the vast majority of our braking. Entry is the place we use to make the transition from going straight to turning. This is where we can safely ease off the brake while we turn the steering wheel. We will overlap the end of braking with the beginning of turning. By the time we're in arc, we are completely off the brake.
The goal is to smoothly overlap the transition into turning and the transition out of braking. As we roll the steering wheel into the turn, we're going to lift our foot off the brake pedal. Essentially, as we are in entry for the turn, we're in lift for braking. Of the entire process of turning, the car is least stable during entry. To add insult to injury, the tires are most stressed during entry because we're both turning and braking at the same time.
Popular thought used to be never overlap braking and turning at all, but overlap can be beneficial. To review, all cars have a static weight distribution, usually about 55% on the front tires and 45% on the rears. When we apply the brakes, the car pitches forward. This causes weight transfer, changing the static weight distribution by shifting weight to the front wheels. The additional weight can be beneficial because it adds grip to the front tires. This added bite, or increase in grip, helps the car overcome the initial resistance to changing direction. However, once the car begins to physically turn, the added weight on the front wheels ceases to be a benefit. Entry is actually a very dynamic time. For reasons, again, beyond the scope of this tape, the car is subject to constantly changing conditions, which do not stabilize until the car enters arc.
At some point, all this theory enters the realm of esoterica, and we're just going to have to use seat of our pants feel to determine if we're stressing the tire too much. Once we enter arc, however, the car becomes more stable, and we can just coast or accelerate to exit. Exit is pretty straightforward. We loosen the steering wheel up, roll out of the steering until our car becomes straight with the road, and then we can gradually accelerate. So long as we don't lose traction through acceleration, exit is pretty uneventful. Having said all that, you might think we've beaten the concept of turning to death. But actually, the technique of turning has never come up in our conversation at all. The application of technique is how we're going to make all our newly acquired technical knowledge stick. Or make the tires stick. Or something like that.
We identify 3 points that trigger our actions as we pass through the 4 phases of turning. As we are in approach, our eyes fix on the point diagrammed by the arrow. This place is called turn in. Turn in marks the beginning of entry. As we cross the turn in point, our eyes fix on the next arrow. This place is called apex. By the time we cross apex, we should be well into arc. Exactly where entry ends and arc begins is a matter of style and the characteristics of the turn. Similarly, exit is also a matter of style. But the last arrow is the place where exit will end and our wheel will be straight again. This is called turn out.
This technique may seem very subtle, and in fact it is, but oh what a difference it makes. Without the technique, turning becomes a hodgepodge of activity. Our eyes are bouncing across the road, up and back. We're constantly measuring our distance between this side of the car and this side of the road, and then to that side of the car and that side of the road. Our brain is overloaded with information, and it's always playing catch-up. In essence, we never really know where we are in a turn, and we're always making little corrections with the steering wheel. We never enter arc. We're in a state of entry throughout the entire turn. Application of a technique where we fix our eyes at strategic locations buys us two things. First of all, our brain now has a finite amount of information to process and is able to do it more quickly. Therefore, our concentration level increases. Secondly, with a higher concentration level, our movements become more precise. Transitions through each of the four phases of the turn become more distinct and more fluid. Turning becomes a proactive activity rather than a reactive one. I'm driving along a straight section of a major highway. I'm constantly scanning both of my mirrors, and I'm looking ahead at the horizon with my peripheral vision keeping track of what's going on beside me. Up ahead is a turn to the right. Approach, since I don't have to slow, is simply getting to the left side of the road. As I enter the turn, my gaze fixes on the center line of the road to my right. I'm looking at a lane line, and I'm going to gradually inch across the road to apex, which is in the center of the turn about here. On a long turn like this, apex is actually very long, so I hug the inside side of the road. I'm using my peripheral vision to see what's going on around me, but I begin looking for my turnout point, which is right around here where the turn ends, and I gradually lighten up on the steering wheel, and I inch over to the left side of the road for turnout. It isn't necessary to always stay in the center of the road. This process of moving across the lane or widening the arc through our turn has very little beneficial effect on the highway. In fact, to someone who didn't know what you were doing, it might appear that you were drunk, so certainly don't do this if there's a cruiser in your rearview mirror. I, however, do use this process on the highway because I find that it requires more precise movements of the steering wheel and heightens my concentration level. In a tighter turn, however, this process of widening the arc will definitely be of benefit because it will increase the amount of traction that you have in reserve.
At first glance, this might seem like the best path through a sharp bend in the road. Notice the car's path is always directly in the center of the lane. By making our arc a little wider through a turn, we lessen the centrifugal force. We in essence increase the envelope of traction beyond what it would normally be by moving turn in back, starting entry a little earlier, and not turning the steering wheel quite as much. We cross the apex and then inch out to the turnout point, except the turnout point is farther away.
Let's take a look at our sharp right-hand turn again.
As we approach, we inch left and look at turn-in. Immediately my eyes cross to the apex and I inch toward the right. Steering wheel still in arc, my eyes jump to turn out and I exit the turn.
Notice that entry was very quick in that situation. There wasn't even time to mention it, but I used it just the same. As my eyes went from turn-in to apex, I lifted off the brake and turned my steering wheel to arc. Turning is a very complex maneuver. All these events that overlap have to occur as second nature, almost without consciously thinking about them. With a little practice, it's not too difficult. Turning from one road onto another uses basically the same technique. I'll just have to slow a little more. As I approach the turn bay, I signal. I get completely into the turn bay, but I hug the white line. I downshift. Turn in is right where the line crosses the road. Apex is the line of the two lanes that I cross, and turn out is on the far curb of the other road. Turning requires the most sophisticated assembly of all of our techniques because it's the most complicated. While executing the four phases of turning, we may be required to execute all the phases of braking and all the phases of accelerating. Getting all the phases of turning to happen second nature will not happen overnight. It takes practice. Always practice on roads that are lightly traveled and roads you know well. There's nothing more frightening than trying to find apex in the middle of an unfamiliar turn only to be surprised and find you're facing oncoming traffic. These techniques will open many new doors to you as a driver, but they will take time to master, and you can't rush them. Go out in your car in the driveway and manipulate all the controls through the 4 phases of turning. Then come back in and review the tape. Then go out and drive. Add each of the techniques one at a time as they feel natural, as they feel comfortable. Don't be discouraged if everything is a little bit rough or everything is a little slow at first. Get the motions correct, and in time, smoothness will naturally occur. So now we have the techniques that make us more intelligent drivers. We're able to maximize our car's capabilities beyond what we believed were its limits. But we have to remember we aren't the only ones doing the driving. The complete intelligent driver is able to contend with turn in, apex, and turn out, as well as this. In addition to the generic techniques that we've discussed in this tape, there are several situations that deserve special mention. These are situations where we can't apply a generic technique or methodology. We simply ask ourselves, is it this case? Well, if so, then we're going to do this. First, a stop sign. When you intend to stop at a stop sign, stop with your front end adjacent to the sign itself. After this, you can inch yourself forward so that you can look down the road to get a more clear view and exit the roadway more safely. Contrast this with entering a highway or a freeway when you have an access ramp. Never ever stop along the access ramp. Stopping along an access ramp is one of the most unsafe maneuvers any driver can do. Always keep up your speed at an access ramp and merge with the traffic that's already on that road. When you're exiting a freeway with an exit ramp, always get on the exit ramp as soon as it starts. This allows you to slow down out of the path of traffic that's actually traveling on the road.
The purpose of a turn bay is to allow you to slow outside the normal flow of traffic. Don't slow as you gradually meander over the line for the turn bay. Turn as soon as the bay starts and then slow.
If there's no turn bay, signal early to alert drivers behind you that you intend to slow so you can exit the roadway. Also, if you're stopping at a traffic light and you intend to go straight, never occupy the right lane. Always leave the right lane open for people that intend to go right on red. There's nothing more obnoxiously rude than holding up a train of cars that intend to go right on red when you're intending to go straight and are sitting there at a red light.
When you come to an intersection where the light is green and traffic going straight won't allow you to cross and make the turn, it's all right to stop in the middle of the intersection and wait. Some people incorrectly stop back at the line, and this causes a problem. If the traffic going straight never stops because of rush hour, the person who waits at the line will never get a chance to cross traffic. If you move out into the middle of the intersection, when the light turns yellow and the traffic going straight stops, you and maybe one other car can cross before the light for the other direction turns green. This is perfectly legal, and you'll never hold up traffic because you'll always be able to turn when the other traffic stops.
When driving on the highway, always observe good lane discipline. One of my pet peeves is left lane bandits. If somebody wants to pass you and exceed the speed limit and break the law, it's not your job to regulate them. For all you know, a passenger in that car could be suffering from a medical emergency, and you could be contributing to a bigger hazard than you think they're causing. When you're on the highway, always signal when you intend to change lanes, and never allow yourself to become adjacent to another car in another lane. Two cars adjacent to each other become a traveling roadblock, not allowing other cars that intend to pass that option. So if you're going to pass somebody, signal, pull out to the side, move past them, and then pull back into the right lane again. If you don't intend to drive faster than them, you have no business passing. Lastly, if somebody cuts out in front of you on the highway, gets in your lane, don't stab on the brakes. Cover the brake lightly, press the pedal slowly to allow the car to set up, and slowly come to a safe speed behind them. I see a lot of people jamming on their brakes, which forces people behind them to jam on their brakes. And what we have then is one of those inexplicable stalls on the highway, where everybody waits in their cars for an hour to creep about a mile, only to find out there was no reason for us to stop in the first place. What caused this? Now we know. One more thing about passing on the highway. If you intend to pass someone who is hogging the left lane, don't flash your lights at that person. Use your hazard flashers. People have been shot for flashing their lights at other drivers who took offense to them. Now let's move on to what happens in the snow and the rain.
Tires in the wet have to reach through a slight film of water covering the asphalt.
Tires have grooves to channel water away from the bottom of the tread. Literally, the tread pierces through the water so that the very tips of the tread can make contact with the roadway surface.
The faster we go, the harder it becomes for the grooves to channel the water away. And soon, the tire is running on a film of water. This is called aquaplaning.
Tire engineers are able to calculate the speed at which a tire will aquaplane. So you can rest assured, so long as a tire is properly inflated and has a legal amount of minimum tread depth, that a tire probably won't aquaplane at normal highway speeds. Also, there's been significant advancements in tire compounds in the last 10 years, and today, a tire maintains about as much traction in the wet as it will in the dry. The difference is when you finally reach that limit of adhesion. In the dry, a tire will maintain a fair amount of traction as it skids across the dry roadway surface, making it relatively easy for us to regain control. In the wet, however, we're skidding because we're literally skimming over a small plane of water. So you don't have to be afraid of driving in the rain because you basically have as much traction as you do in the dry. Remember these 3 points. First of all, oil deposits at places where cars stop because they rest there long enough to drip oil onto the road. And as soon as it begins to rain, the rain will lift that oil to the roadway surface, making it more difficult for other cars who intend to stop at those places. So always be especially careful when it begins to rain and when it rains lightly throughout the day at places like stop signs and intersections and traffic lights. Secondly, even though we have just about as much traction in the wet as we do in the dry, losing traction in the wet happens much more abruptly. The tires don't give us near as much warning as they would in the dry because we're literally on top of water at that particular point in time. Lastly, always give yourself some extra room. Press the brake a little earlier and don't press the pedal quite as hard. Always work a little farther below the limits of the car just to make sure you have a little bit in reserve. When snow first falls and it's fresh, it's just the same as rain.
The tread pushes the snow out of the way and touches the road.
A common misconception is that a tire digs into the snow for traction. This, of course, isn't true. However, if the snow has been driven over or it's began to melt a little bit, things are different entirely.
Once a car has driven over snow, the weight of the car pushing down on the snow actually melts it. The snow under the tire becomes water while the tire is over top of it, but then freezes afterwards. So if we follow in the track made by another car, we are actually driving over ice. To make matters worse, the weight of a car melts the top layer of ice to form a film of water on the ice. It's very slippery and there's almost no traction at all. Sometimes more snow falls over tire tracks, hiding them from our view. As the first new snow falls in the liquid with freezing tire tracks, it forms jagged spikes. Tires are designed to grip these spikes, but the weight of the car will melt the ice, and again, we have no traction.
Driving in the snow is unpredictable at best. There are techniques that have been developed by European rally drivers over the years, but they're beyond the scope of this tape. I recommend, if you live in an area with a large amount of annual snowfall, taking a specialty driving course or buying a book on techniques for driving on low traction surfaces. The point is this: our limits diminish severely when it's snowing. So slow if you can, but if you're on the highway, always maintain speed with other cars. Don't force other cars to maneuver around you because then you become the hazard. On the other hand, if the guy behind you is determined to wrap himself around a telephone pole, let him go. Don't run the risk of coming entangled with him. Now, we can't cover all the situations you could possibly find yourself in, but basically the thought processes that we've covered here to take us through these techniques will take you through any variation on these themes. Always remember to be courteous and be patient. If the guy behind you is not going to be courteous, let him go. Behind the wheel is no place to vent anger. Driving is an art. It's one of the most enjoyable experiences we have. It's also one of the biggest responsibilities. Review this tape often. Always obey all local and national traffic laws, and always wear your safety belts. Even if your car has an airbag, they are no substitute for safety belts. Be safe, be courteous, be precise. Drive intelligently.